Picture this. You are in Singapore. You pull out a note from your wallet and pay for your coffee. The cashier takes it, no questions asked. Normal, right? Except the note in your hand is not a Singapore dollar, it is a Brunei dollar, printed in a tiny kingdom on the island of Borneo that most people could not even point to on a map. And Singapore took it at full value, because legally, it is worth exactly the same thing. $1 for $1. No conversion, no fee, nothing. And this has been the case since 1967, 58 years, through oil crises, through the Asian financial meltdown, through a global pandemic. The arrangement never broke, not once. So how does a country like Singapore, one of the sharpest financial minds in the world, end up running two currencies at the exact same time? And why does it work when almost nothing like it exists anywhere else on Earth? To understand this, you have to go back to 1965. And what happened in 1965 is one of the most dramatic things in Southeast Asian history. Singapore was part of Malaysia. They had merged 2 years earlier. And then on the 9th of August, Malaysia voted 126-0 to kick Singapore out, gone. Just like that. A nation of 2 million people, overnight, with no army, no currency of its own, no plan. Lee Kuan Yew, Singapore's prime minister, broke the news on live television. He was crying, genuinely crying. He had spent his entire political career believing the two countries belonged together, and now that was over. But here's the thing nobody talks about. When Singapore got thrown out, it did not even have its own money. Singapore, Malaysia, and Brunei were all still using the same shared currency from the colonial days, the Malaya and British Borneo dollar. One currency, three countries, or soon to be three countries. So in 1967, all three of them sat down and said, okay, we each need our own. Malaysia prints the Malaysian dollar, Singapore prints the Singapore dollar, Brunei prints the Brunei dollar. Each country, its own currency, its own central bank, full stop. But they also made a deal. Every single one of these new dollars would be worth the same as the others, 1-to-1. You could use any of them in any of the three countries. No friction. The idea was simple. These economies were so tangled up in trade with each other that putting up currency barriers would have been economic self-harm. They called it the Currency Interchangeability Agreement, and for 6 years, it worked exactly as planned. Then 1971 happened, and nothing in global finance was the same after that. Richard Nixon was dealing with a mess at home. The Vietnam War had drained American coffers. Inflation was creeping up, and the US dollar, which was supposed to be backed by gold at $35 an ounce, was starting to look shaky. Countries around the world were getting nervous. France actually sent a battleship to New York to physically retrieve its gold deposits from the Federal Reserve. On August 15th, 1971, Nixon went on television and announced he was closing the gold window. The United States would no longer convert dollars into gold. Just like that, the entire post-war system of fixed exchange rates, the Bretton Woods system, started crumbling. By 1973, it was finished. Currencies around the world started floating. Some countries lost massive value overnight. The ground had shifted underneath every single economy on the planet. Malaysia watched all of this and made a decision. On the 8th of May, 1973, they unilaterally pulled out of the Currency Interchangeability Agreement. No negotiation, no warning. They just ended it with Singapore and Brunei in one move. And honestly, Malaysia had reasons. By the early 70s, Singapore and Malaysia were becoming completely different economies. Singapore was industrializing at breakneck speed. Foreign factories were pouring in. The country was reinventing itself as a global trade hub. Meanwhile, Malaysia was still heavily dependent on rubber and tin. Their economic paths had diverged so sharply that a shared currency arrangement started to feel like a cage, not a bridge. So Malaysia walked away. And for a brief moment, the whole agreement looked dead. But Brunei did not leave. Brunei looked at Singapore and said, "We are staying in." That decision might sound strange at first. Brunei is tiny, fewer than 500,000 people. It sits on the northern coast of Borneo, ruled by a monarchy, and its economy runs almost entirely on oil. Why would a country that small voluntarily chain its currency to someone else's? The answer is that Brunei was not chaining itself out of weakness. It was making a calculated bet on stability. Think about what Brunei was facing. Oil money is volatile. When prices are good, life is good. When prices drop, everything gets uncomfortable fast. Brunei needed an anchor, something rock solid that would keep its currency from swinging wildly every time the oil market had a bad quarter. Singapore was that anchor. Singapore's central bank, the Monetary Authority of Singapore, or MAS, had already started building a reputation for disciplined, precise currency management. Singapore was accumulating foreign reserves. Its financial system was becoming one of the most trusted in Asia. So Brunei essentially said, we will peg our dollar to yours. Every single Brunei dollar we print will be fully backed by reserves. We will not print money on a whim. We will let your stability become our stability. It was not blind trust. It was strategic, and it has held for over 50 years. Here is where it gets genuinely interesting, because Singapore does not run its monetary policy the way almost any other country does. Most central banks in the world fight inflation by adjusting interest rates. They raise rates when prices get out of hand. They lower rates when the economy needs a push. Singapore does something completely different. MAS manages the exchange rate. That is it. That is the main lever. They take the Singapore dollar and measure it against a basket of currencies from Singapore's biggest trading partners. Then they let it float within a band. If it drifts too far in either direction, MAS steps in and buys or sells currency to pull it back. Why would they do it this way instead of using interest rates? Because Singapore imports roughly 40 cents of every single dollar spent inside the country. The exchange rate directly controls how expensive everything from food to energy is for ordinary people. For a small, trade-dependent economy like Singapore, the exchange rate is a more powerful weapon against inflation than interest rates ever could be. And this is the part that connects back to Brunei. Because the Brunei dollar is pegged 1-to-1 against the Singapore dollar, everything MAS does to stabilize Singapore's currency automatically stabilizes Brunei's as well. Brunei essentially gets Singapore's monetary policy for free. No infrastructure required, no team of economists needed to build their own framework from scratch. Singapore's discipline becomes Brunei's stability. It is an arrangement that benefits both sides, but in very different ways. Now, here is something that catches most people off guard. Under this agreement, banks in both countries are required to accept the other country's currency. If you walk into a Singapore bank holding Brunei dollars, they must take them, no argument. But shops, restaurants, taxi drivers, they are not obligated to do the same thing. The agreement classifies the Brunei dollar as customary tender in Singapore, not legal tender. There is a real difference. Legal tender means everyone must accept it. Customary tender means it is expected and encouraged, but technically optional. So yes, a shop owner in Singapore could refuse your Brunei dollar if they wanted to. In practice, most places in areas with cross-border traffic will accept it without a second thought. But if someone does refuse you, here is the part that makes this whole thing feel almost absurd. MAS has an official feedback form on its website where you can report the vendor, you provide the name, the address, the date, what happened, and MAS will go and engage that vendor directly. The government of one of the world's most powerful financial centers will personally follow up because a shop owner did not accept money from a kingdom in Borneo. That level of commitment to an agreement tells you something about how seriously Singapore takes this. While we are talking about things that catch people off guard, let me throw one more in. Brunei prints a $10,000 banknote, a single note worth $10,000. And because of the interchangeability agreement, that note is technically worth 10,000 Singapore dollars too. The Singapore $10,000 note and the Brunei $10,000 note were, for a while, the most valuable banknotes officially in circulation anywhere on the planet, 8 times more valuable than the next highest, which is the 1,000 Swiss franc note. Singapore stopped printing its $10,000 note years ago. Brunei followed in 2020, partly to reduce money laundering risk, but the notes that exist are still valid. They did not disappear. They are just not being made anymore. That is the kind of detail that makes you realize how deep this rabbit hole goes. This agreement has not just sat quietly in the background. It has been stress tested by some of the worst financial events of the last 60 years. 1997, the Asian financial crisis. Currencies across the region were collapsing. The Thai baht, the Indonesian rupiah, the Malaysian ringgit. Countries were going to the International Monetary Fund for bailouts. Panic was real. Singapore was not untouched. The economy slowed, but the Singapore dollar held. It did not collapse the way its neighbors did. Mas had spent decades building up foreign reserves and managing the exchange rate with surgical precision. When the crisis hit, that preparation paid off in a way that was almost invisible to the outside world. And because the Brunei dollar was locked to the Singapore dollar, Brunei rode that same wave of relative calm while countries all around it were in free fall. 2020. COVID hit every economy on Earth, trade volumes dropped, supply chains fractured. But the currency arrangement between Singapore and Brunei kept functioning. No renegotiation, no emergency measures specific to the agreement. It just held. 58 years. Every single crisis the world has thrown at it, still standing. So what actually makes this arrangement survive when so many others have fallen apart? It comes down to 2 things. Brunei has the discipline to back every dollar it prints with real reserves. Singapore has the expertise to keep its own dollar steady enough that Brunei's peg actually means something. Neither side gains anything by breaking it. The moment trust disappears, the whole thing collapses. And both countries know that, so they maintain it, quietly, carefully, for over half a century. There's no single moment of drama here, no crisis that almost killed it. It survived precisely because neither side ever gave it a reason to fail. That is what real financial engineering looks like. Not loud, not flashy, just 2 countries, decades apart in size and influence, building something that outlasts the chaos around them.